Hello, and happy marvelous Monday, everybody. I hope that you all are well. I'm Karissa Spann, the landlord and tenant coach, and today I'm excited to share some information that I believe is going to be helpful for renters as well as tenants. Today, we are talking about the cost of illegal evictions. I know that for a lot of landlords, as well as rental tenants, it has been a scary thing going into the pandemic, coming out of the pandemic. There were a lot of families who had financial burdens and they were not able to pay their rent. Well, that also created a financial hardship for a lot of landlords. And today we are talking about the cost of illegal evictions. All right, so before I get into the discussion, just want to introduce myself to some who are new, who are just tuning in for the very first time. Again, I'm Karissa Spann. I am passionate about sharing information that impacts the rental community. I've been in the property management real estate industry for almost 3 decades, operating in various capacities as a property manager educator, creating my own property management company, and just working with clients and thousands of families over the years. And so today, if you have questions, if you have comments, remarks, or observations, please drop it in the comment section. Also, I would love to know where my viewers are tuned in from. So if you wouldn't mind, drop a comment in the box and let me know where you're tuning from. Go ahead and be cordial. Say, hey, girl, hey, show me some love in the chat box if you find any information that I share today helpful, or if you think it may be helpful for other landlords or other tenants. Please, by all means, like, tag, and or share this post. If you are watching the replay, let me say thank you. Thank you so much. I know that I have viewers on Facebook, I have viewers on YouTube, as well as my LinkedIn channel. This is what I do each and every Monday, and I do apologize for showing up a little late today. I had a long day in the office, but I wanted to make sure that I got on to share this information with you because I've been getting a lot of questions. I've been getting a lot of emails and calls from owners who are concerned about evictions and how they can navigate evictions. I've also been getting inquiries from tenants because tenants want to know, well, Karissa, my landlord has changed the law. Is that legal? And amongst of, and in addition to that, there are a lot of other questions that tenants have. There are things that are happening that I want people to be aware of and mindful of because an illegal eviction is costly. And so that's one of the biggest mistakes that a landlord can make is to conduct an illegal eviction because there are consequences. And I don't think that a lot of people are aware. And so this is why I share information, right? Because what you don't know as a landlord or tenant can or will hurt you. And so my goal is obviously to try to prevent people from going down that rabbit hole. So this is what I do each and every week. All right. So let me just acknowledge a few people who are here today. Hello, Ms. Davis. Thank you so much for tuning in. I have viewers who are tuned in the DC metropolitan area. I have viewers who are tuned in Atlanta area, South Carolina, New York area. And so I love to know where you're tuned in from so that I can bring information that is relative to you in your particular jurisdiction. Here's why I do that. The laws are going to be different just depending on where the rental property is, okay? And so the rules and the laws in, for instance, DC, because I see that Miss Sylvia is tuned in from Washington, DC. The laws are going to be different. So for someone who is renting property or a landlord or housing provider in Alabama or New York, those laws are going to be different. And so that's why I always ask that you let me know which jurisdiction you're tuned in from. So thank you for that. Thank you. So let me get straight into it because we're rather late today. But I just wanted to share this information because we are now in we're now going to see a wave of evictions. And I said it before, I'll say it again. I told landlords that you all are going to see, experience, or witness a tsunami of evictions, and it is starting to happen. Okay. The courts have opened. In many jurisdictions, court cases are being called, and landlords are allowed to evict tenants, but it must be done legally. All right, let me say that. Let me say it again. Evictions must be done legally, because if not, the tenant could turn around and sue the landlord. Yes, tenants, you can sue your landlord if there is an illegal eviction. And a lot of owners are finding out the hard way that they have not followed the process. They don't have all their documents. They're not legally operating a rental property business, or they're doing things. And in many cases, tenants, they know their rights and they know the law more than some owners or housing providers. And so today, I want to talk about evictions for a little while. If you have a question, please let me know in the chat box. All right. But I do want to say that an illegal eviction essentially is when a landlord takes measures into their own hands to evict a tenant outside of the legal eviction process or the procedures that are in place in that particular area. Now, here's what I find. One of the most common measures that landlords will take is something as simple as changing the locks on the door without notifying the tenant in advance. So, um, if you have a tenant, they've not paid their rent, or let's say, for instance, a tenant has given notice that they're going to vacate, all right? But for whatever reason, they haven't finalized that process, right? So they haven't reached out to the owner to say, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Landlord, thank you for letting me stay at your rental property. I appreciate you. I don't appreciate you. I'm gone. Goodbye. Here are your keys, right? In a situation where a tenant has not given final closure, they have not said, okay, I have definitely vacated the property, although they have given notice, all right? And sometimes this happens, all right? And if you haven't received that notification, um, whether it's by text, email, a telephone call, or something, in other words, you have no documentation from the tenant to bring closure to that tenancy, that landlord and tenant agreement. That tenant may still legally occupy that place, which means that a landlord cannot change the lock. So if you have a tenant and they promise to be out, let's say by May 31st, and on June the 2nd, if you have not confirmed or received anything in writing from your tenant saying that they have vacated the property, please don't assume that they have vacated the property. Or let's just hypothetically say that maybe they started the process. Maybe they started to move some of their things, but they still have some belongings inside. But yet they haven't given you the keys. They haven't given you the final closure or notification say, I have definitely moved out. Please assume that they are still occupying your rental property. All right. So please don't just go in and change the lock, because that's one of the biggest, the common mistake that I see that landlords are making. That is called a self-eviction. All right. So please make sure that you know and understand that. So legally, landlords, they need a reason or a justification, if you will, or a just cause to evict a renter. I know that some landlords and tenants, they have these disputes, and they have maybe a disagreement, or maybe it's just not a good mix, right? The chemistry is just not there. Excuse me. Excuse me. So, in that case, when there is not a good flow, excuse me, y'all, I apologize. I'm suffering from allergies. All right. So, When it's not a good chemistry, I get it. Sometimes landlords want to terminate the tenancy. I get it. Like I said in my introduction, I've been doing this. I've been in the industry for almost 3 decades. I've had good tenants, I've had bad tenants, I've had tenants from heaven, but I've also had tenants from hell. So I understand. Now, when it comes to the eviction process, excuse me, as I'm struggling, I'm trying to get through this with my allergies tearing me up today. Landlords, they must follow the law. There are local laws in place, there are federal laws in place. So please make sure that as a landlord, as a housing provider, as an owner, a property manager, a new real estate investor, please, by all means, take some time to find out what the laws are in that particular jurisdiction. It's not enough to just, as a landlord or a owner, to just collect money from tenants at the beginning of the month and think that's all there is to it. And maybe you have a disagreement, you don't like the tenant, and you just want them gone. Listen, there's a process. There are procedures in place which governs how landlords must do business. And tenants, again, tenants, you have rights. Tenants do have rights. All right. I know sometimes landlords don't really like to hear that, but that is the truth. Tenants do have rights. So please make sure that you understand the process. Landlords, here's another thing, landlords cannot exaggerate or falsify documents or facts to justify an illegal eviction. That could turn around that could turn around and bite you in the butt, because tenants can sue you if you are doing that. Okay, so please listen to the tips, listen to the information that I am sharing with you today. All right, please share this with other landlords, share this with other tenants. So just depending on the state, the jurisdiction, that will determine what a landlord must do. So for instance, since we have come out of the pandemic, some states and cities, they have made changes to how a landlord can govern their business in terms of what they must do. So for instance, originally in DC, I'll start with DC because I see that Ms. Davis and some landlords are tuned in from Washington, DC. Since the pandemic has come about, right? We went into the pandemic, we came out of the pandemic. The District of Columbia, they said, you know what? We recognize that tenants need some help. So we're going to put a little cushion there to make sure that tenants are not being evicted, because DC had money to assist tenants who were delinquent in their rent. Okay. So that created a nightmare for a lot of landlords. Why? Because there were new rules, new laws put in place. So originally, whereas a landlord could have given maybe a 30-day notice, now the laws have changed to say, well, no, Mr. and Mrs. Landlord, you must give a 60-day notice. In addition, if you're trying to evict a tenant for non-payment of rent, Mr. and Mrs. Landlord, in the District of Columbia, you also have to show that you've applied or assisted for assistance for your tenant to get money from the pots of resources that were available. And so the dynamics change, a lot of things change. So before you try to evict your tenant, please find out from a reputable landlord and tenant attorney what the laws are and understand what you must do. Also, in the District of Columbia, and I know in a lot of jurisdictions, the courts have made it a requirement that a landlord, before an eviction is filed, that the landlord or the owner has a legal rental property operation. So that may consist of a business license, a renter's license. It's called different things in different places. So that means that there's some sort of documentation, there's some structure to the rental property business. All right. And so please make sure that you are consulting with the landlord and tenant attorney. The information that I share is not legal information, but I'm sharing with you information that you must know. So, minimally, let me just share foundational knowledge and information that you should have. All right. So, if maybe you're not in a situation where you're trying to apply for an eviction today, pack this information up, put it in your backpack, put it in your suitcase, take it with you, because at some point in life, as a landlord or a housing provider or professional, you may need this information. Okay. So landlords cannot falsify information. They cannot illegally justify evictions that are not legal. All right, so let me get into my tips that I want to share today. Thank you, Christina. Thank you so much for tuning in, beautiful. Oh, and by the way, happy belated Mother's Day to all of you mothers. I'm a mother. I'm a mother of 4. I am a grandmother. I love holidays, and I had an amazing weekend. I hope that you had a great weekend if you're a mother in any type of capacity. All right. So let me get into my tips today. And again, if you have questions, if you have comments from a landlord or tenant perspective, please drop it in the comments section. All right. And I will respond to them. Okay. So here's the first thing that I want landlords as well as tenants to understand. So I'm going to share 3 tips today. We're talking about the cost of illegal evictions. So here's the first cost. Tenants can sue landlords for damage to their personal property. In a previous live, I shared how in a situation where a new housing provider, a young lady had just gotten into the property management industry. She was not knowledgeable, all right? And she made the mistake of putting the tenant's belongings out because she knew that the tenant had another place. However, she had never taken this tenant to court. So the judge did not give her a judgment or writ. So legally, that tenant was still able to occupy that rental property until that housing provider took steps through the court to make sure the tenant was evicted. So I shared how the landlord was on social media and she saw pictures of the tenant's new home, and the tenant had a housewarming and all the things that were happening in the new place. But the tenant did not give the landlord keys. She did not bring official closure. And so the landlord, she took it upon herself to have a contractor to remove all of that family's belongings. She changed the locks. And so the tenant, maybe 3, 4, 5 days, I forgot the time frame, contacted the landlord to say, hey, I apologize. I wasn't able to get back. I didn't have a ride. I didn't have transportation. I came a little earlier today, but I was not able to get in. And so that young lady was kind of like, I don't know if she was concerned. Maybe she should have been concerned, but she just had a nonchalant attitude. And she was like, well, we changed the locks and we got rid of your things. And the tenant was like, what do you mean you changed the locks and you got rid of my things? I haven't given you the keys. I haven't given official notification that was done. And so that tenant was able to sue her for a lot of money. And in addition to that, the damage to this tenant's property, because she was able to find some stuff in a dumpster, she was able to sue. So she was able to sue for the damage to her personal property. That is one of the costs of an illegal eviction. Here's the second thing landlords must be aware of. This is the second cost when there's an illegal eviction. Landlords can pay the tenant's legal expenses. So there are court fees, court costs for filing the documentation. Landlords can be found liable for paying for those fees and expenses. And third and finally, a tenant can sue the landlord and have the landlord to pay for their attorney. So let me just take a step back. So let's say you have a tenant that's in your property, right? Has not paid rent in almost, let's say, 18 months. That's a long time, right? So the pandemic, it provided a lot of protection for tenants who were not able to pay their rent. Okay. And so some tenants, they had gone, seriously, they had gone 18 months without paying rent. And so the landlord, I know in a lot of places, I shared a lot of stories. I shared a lot of real-time stories and situations that were happening right at that moment. Um, some landlords changed the law. They boarded up the property. And although the tenants did owe the money, and if the landlord would have taken the legal way to go about it, they would not have had to come out of their pocket to pay for that tenant's attorney fees. But yet the court said, you know what? We're gonna side with the tenant because Mr. and Mrs. Landlord, you didn't do everything that you were required to do. And so that tenant was able to recoup some money and a case against the landlord, which did include, like I said, the attorney fees, the legal expenses, and then sometimes, in many cases, damage to personal property. So I'm sharing this information because a lot of landlords are trying to do it on their own. And I get it sometimes as a new, inexperienced, or maybe even a veteran housing provider. Maybe you just don't have the financial resources to hire an attorney. And so certainly you can definitely pursue an eviction without an attorney if you're knowledgeable about the process. But there's a cost when you don't know the process, when you are doing things the way that you want to do it, you're taking measures in your own hand. So let me just share a quick recap of what I shared today. Um, and again, this is what I do each and every week. So if the information that I share today is applicable for you, you find it of value, of help, please let me know. If there's a subject that you would like for me to cover in the upcoming weeks, please email me and I promise I will try to cover it. All right, but let me do a quick recap of the 3 tips that I shared today because I know that some viewers are going to tune in a little later. They are going to watch the replay, and I want to make sure that you get it. All right, so we're talking about the cost of illegal evictions. All right, so when it comes to the cost of illegal evictions, landlords can be responsible for damage to tenants' personal property. Landlords can be responsible for tenants' legal expenses. Landlords can also be responsible for tenant attorney fees. So this is the cost. Now, these are just 3 things. And of course, there are more, but these are 3 things, the 3 top costs when a landlord is conducting an eviction outside of the legal court process. Please don't make that mistake. I've shared that what you don't know can and will hurt you. It can actually destroy your business. Listen, I got into property management many, many years ago. All right. So when I first got into property management, I started my own property management company. Now, I was a little bit more knowledgeable about the process because I had been managing property. Right. But I had clients who had no clue and they were just doing things that I had never heard of, never imagined. And so I had to represent clients, I had to take on clients to try to save them and their rental property. So please, by all means, protect your asset. How do you do that? You protect your asset with knowledge. And if you are a tenant, again, please know that you have rights. Don't feel like you have to be bullied by your landlord. But if you are guilty, if there's a breach of a lease, all right. So today I primarily talked about non-payment of rent, but obviously there are other factors like there are other reasons that tenants could be evicted, right? So let's say, for instance, there is some sort of violence or something going on at the property and the property is damaged. If, as a tenant, you are damaging the property, if you have some sort of breach of a lease, your landlord can take you to court, but they cannot, however, do it. They can't take measures into their own hands. So that's it. My time is up, and I thank you for yours. Thank you for hanging in there with me. So here is a question from Ms. Davis. What is the difference between notice to evict versus a notice to quit? Great question. Well, it just depends on the jurisdiction. You're in DC, so you have to give a notice to cure or quit. That means you're giving your tenant time to get their act together or to get out. Now, in the District of Columbia, there are specific forms that you must use. So I had a young lady, true story, I had a young lady, she was new into property management. She purchased a rental property. This was her first investment property. She purchased an apartment building and she wanted to evict the tenants. So she wrote, let me see if I can write a note real quick. So let's just say this landlord, she's got a pen and a piece of paper, and she wrote down on this letter, this piece of paper, if you will, notice to evict. I'm not sure if you can see that. It might be backwards. So this landlord, she wrote it down on a piece of paper, and she gave this tenant, I mean, this is not the exact, but this is just an example, right? And so, but obviously she put the tenant's name, she put the tenant's date on there. You see that? Notice to evict. All right. So she gave all of her tenants a notice saying that they were being evicted in the District of Columbia and in many jurisdictions and states. There are forms that you must use. And so just depending on why you are trying to evict a tenant, that will determine what form you use and how much time you give a tenant. So you have to give them time to fix the problem or to vacate. So non-payment of rent, that may be a 60-day notice. Now, let's say if you want to personally, and I'm talking about the District of Columbia because Ms. Davis is from Washington, D.C. Also, personal use and occupancy in the District of Columbia, I believe it's 90 days you must give your tenant. If it's, let's say, substantial renovations and repairs, there is a time frame that you must give your tenants. And so, again, just depending on the nature of why you want this tenant gone, that will determine which form you use and how much time you give them. And hopefully the tenant will cooperate and just move. Sometimes that happens. I had a client of mine. She was having a very tough time getting the tenant out. So my team and I, we came in, we assisted with managing the property. We began to have conversations with the tenant. We discussed a cash for keys deal with the tenant. And if you don't know what that is, cash for keys, that means you'll give the tenant cash if they agree to move out the property by a specific time period. And so having all those conversations, we are happy to say that we were able to deliver some really great results for our client without her having to take the tenant to court. And she was able to go on and sell excuse me, the rental property, which was her goal. And so sometimes you have a tenant that's willing to work with you, but then you have tenants who are not able to jump through a hoop. They may not have anywhere to go. They may not have the financial resources readily available to cooperate with you. And so understand that sometimes tenants, they are resisting for a reason, but if you can get to the root of the problem and try to work with them, usually, and in many cases, it will work to your advantage and in your favor if you're a landlord. But if you go in as a landlord. And I have another client I had been working with over the years, and she had been really, really mean and nasty to her tenant. She just talked to her in a way that was so disrespectful. I know, excuse me, I know that there was a cultural difference, and there was a there was a challenge. There was a barrier when it came to communication, right? And so they just did not see eye to eye. And this client of mine, she begged me, she pleaded me, Karissa, can you please? Is there anything that you can say or do to help me in this situation with my tenant? But by the time we got involved, that landlord had been so nasty for so many years. To the tenant, that the tenant was like, listen, I'm just so over it. I appreciate you coming in as a new as a new property management company, but my landlord has been so nasty to me. I paid my rent on time, but she still treated me less than a human. So please don't make that mistake. If you are doing that as a landlord, please know and understand that in addition to tenants having rights, they are still human at the end of the day. Okay. So I just strongly believe, I just have this crazy belief that when we work together, we can do it better. Right. And, I've shared how if you use the philosophy or the method of using honey versus vinegar, usually you have a greater outcome. So again, that's it. My time is up. I thank you for yours. Please make sure that you are tuning in every Monday right here on this Facebook, YouTube, or LinkedIn channel at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you have questions, if you have comments, and again, if there is any subject matter that you would like for me to cover, please email me. Let me share my email address. Give me one moment. All right, my email address is going to be carissaspann@gmail.com. And I am going to pull it up on the screen. Give me one moment. Email address, carissaspann@gmail.com. This is how you can reach me. Please make sure that you are subscribed to my YouTube channel. I have some hot topics I will be sharing in the upcoming weeks. I have some more information I'm excited to share with you. All right. I do appreciate you. Again, any subject matter that I've not shared so far you would like for me to cover, please let me know. Please email me. Let me know what jurisdiction you're tuning in from. All right. It's not just for landlords, but it's also for tenants. I advocate for tenants. I'm a tenant advocate. But again, I'm also a landlord and tenant coach. So I want to share information across both sides of the aisle. All right. Please make sure that you connect with me next Monday right here at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm Karissa. Bye for now.